Hello and welcome into this season finale Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series Rewind show right here on Racing News Now. As always, I'm your host, Garth Allen. Thank you once again for joining me today. If this is your first time catching a Racing News Now video, consider going down below to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications so you don't miss a thing going forward from RNN. On today's Cup Rewind, we're looking back at the 2019 season finale, the 21st annual Ford EcoBoost 400, 267 laps, 400.5 miles around the mile-and-a-half Homestead Miami Speedway in Homestead, Florida, just outside of Miami. Now, this was not the most exciting championship battle we've had in a while. This kind of was decided long before the end of this race. We've had some real good championship battles the past few years with this whole championship format. No matter what your opinion on that is, it has created good racing, whether artificially or organically. It has created good racing. So this one, I think, was a bit of a disappointment compared to what we have had recently. So let's just dive right into it. 3 caution flags in this race for a total of 15 laps. There really wasn't anything happening incident-wise in this race to create any kind of a drama, restarts or anything that might jumble up what was happening with the Championship 4. No incidents in Stage 1. That concluded lap 80 with Martin Truex Jr. taking the Stage 1 victory. Truex, early on, definitely had the Championship 4 covered. Definitely, as we went throughout this race, for most of the race, until we got into the nighttime and things started changing, all 4 of these drivers were really under a blanket with each other. They were clearly among the 4 or 5 best cars in Homestead, at least early on in the race. The nighttime changed that just a bit. Lap 138, the only caution for an incident in this race was when John Hunter Nemechek had his incident in Turn 2. Final caution of the race was the Stage 2 conclusion at lap 160 with Kyle Busch taking the Stage 2 victory. 14 lead changes among 5 drivers in this race. Not many drivers spending a lot of time up front in this race. Kyle Busch led the most laps, 120 of them spent out front for the driver of the 18 car. 103 laps were led by Martin Truex. 41 laps went to Kevin Harvick. 2 laps were led by Denny Hamlin. And 1 lap led by Ricky Stenhouse during cycles of pit stops. So like I said, all 4 of them, Kyle Busch, Martin Truex, Denny Hamlin, Kevin Harvick, all really kind of under a blanket early on in this race. Kyle Larson really seemed to be the only driver that could really keep up with them early on in the race. But then as we started progressing into the race, we transitioned into the nighttime. Handlings of cars started to change as we got into the nighttime. They weren't quite as close together as they were, and then the more pit stops we went through, they started to spread out even more. Martin Truex would be the first of the Championship 4 contenders to have issues in this race. Just before the conclusion of Stage 2, the pit stops that were taken during the mid-portions of Stage 2, fairly big mistake made by his pit crew in putting a left side tire on the right side of the car, which, if you're not super familiar with how the mechanics of these cars work, you're like, why does it matter? Why do the tires need to go on a specific side? There's lots of reasons for that. They set up certain sides of tires differently because of how they've got the car weighted and different things like that, different tire pressures and that sort of thing on different sides of the car. And in fact, from the front and the rear, I believe they're different as well. So having a tire that's supposed to be on the left side on the right side is not a good thing. That tire was not going to last on that side. The right side tires are generally made to be a little sturdier because the right sides generally take a bit more of a beating than the left side tires do. So this was a huge mistake by this team. They had to come back down pit road and change it a couple laps later when they realized that they had made this issue. Truex drove all the way back through the field, unlapped himself before the end of Stage 2, and got back on the lead lap. So he was back in contention by the time we got into Stage 3 and no issues there. Denny Hamlin would be the other one that would really have an issue in this race. On the final pit stops of the race, they were green flag pit stops in Stage 3. Chris Gabehart, his crew chief, kind of threw a bit of a Hail Mary, putting a giant piece of tape on the grill. Now, the calculation here was if you put the tape in the exact spot, you're not going to overheat the motor, and it's going to give you the downforce and everything that you need to be faster. Well, apparently the crew guy that put this on the nose didn't put it exactly in the right spot and covered up more of the opening, I think, than what they were planning on. And he overheats the engine. He's just got water just pushing itself out the car in buckets. So that motor was not going to last if they left that tape on there. He had to come back down pit road a few laps later and just take the tape off. So late in the race, Denny Hamlin is a lap down now after having to come back down pit road a second time under this pit sequence. He drove his way back to the lead lap by the end of the race. Unfortunately, if you remember, the Stage 2 conclusion was the final caution of the race, so he didn't have a caution late in the race to save him once he had gotten himself unlapped. He had driven, on those fresh tires, had driven all the way back and unlapped himself around the leader of the race at the time. Unfortunately, again, with no caution, there was no way he was ever going to get back up there, even with unlapping himself. So that was the costly mistake that really cost Denny Hamlin this championship, because I think, as we got later into the night, I think Hamlin possibly might have had the best car of the championship for it. Unfortunately, did not get to show that in the late laps. Kevin Harvick kind of faded as we got into the night as well, mostly due to their pit strategy as well. Those final pit stops really kind of set up how this would play out. Kyle Busch was the first to hit pit road of the championship four among these final pit stops. He hit pit road about 4 or 5 laps, I believe, before Martin Truex, and that really made the difference between those two, because Busch, making up the time on the fresh tires with those 4 or 5 laps before Truex pitted, gained him a lead on Truex coming out of the pits. And then Harvick was either the last car of the pit sequence or one of the last cars, and this did not work for him at all. He was far, far behind by the time everything cycled out. He was catching everyone at the end because he had fresher tires, but he was just so far behind because of waiting that long that he was never going to make up that time. So the Rodney Childers, Kevin Harvick kind of took themselves out of it on the final pit stop as well, just like Denny Hamlin's crew kind of did. So it became a battle between Kyle Busch and Martin Truex. Unfortunately, because of the time that Kyle Busch had gained on this final pit stop over Truex, we really didn't have a battle. The final pit stop was really what determined this championship. Kyle Busch ran away with this at the end of the race. Kyle Busch wins his second Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series championship, wins the Ford EcoBoost 400 over Martin Truex Jr. by 4.5 seconds. Like I said, there wasn't anything happening at the end of the race because the final pit stop determined this race, and we didn't have a caution to really jumble things up, which, again, it happens naturally, but there's no excitement to that either, and isn't that what this format's supposed to give us? Again, Kyle Busch does win the championship, wins the race and the championship, his second career Cup Series championship. Again, the first one came back 4 years ago in 2015. Martin Truex came home in the second position, 4.5 seconds away from his second championship. And then a JGR 1-2-3 at the front of the field. We started the year with a JGR 1-2-3 at Daytona, and we end the year with a JGR 1-2-3 at Homestead with Eric Jones in the third position. So just kind of encapsulating the dominating season that Joe Gibbs Racing had this year. Kevin Harvick close behind there in the fourth position with Joey Logano rounding out the top 5. Rest of your top 10 were Clint Bowyer, Ryan Newman, Austin Dillon, Alex Bowman. And Denny Hamlin made his way all the way back up to the 10th position at the end of the race on those fresh tires, but unfortunately the tape mishap on the final pit stop was what did him in this race and in the championship. 11th through 20th, Ryan Blaney down here in the 11th position. Jimmy Johnson had a good night going a lot of the night, was in the top 5 for portions of it, finished 9th in both stages, but kind of faded late in the race, and 13th, one lap down would be where Johnson would land. Shout outs to both Daniel Hemrick in 12th and Daniel Suarez there in the 14th position, their final races in the 8 and 41 cars. Also, another driver in his final race in that car would be Chris Buescher there in 16th, his last race for JTG Doherty Racing. He's swapping next year with Ricky Stenhouse down there in the 19th position. And then, of course, a couple other drivers somewhat swapping. Paul Menard, his final drive in a full-time ride there in the 17th position. And then the driver replacing him next season, Matt DiBenedetto, down here in the 20th position. 21st through 30th. A couple names down here we don't usually see this far down the list. Kurt Busch in 21st, Eric Almirola in 22nd. John Hunter Nemechek rebounded from his incident for a 23rd place finish. David Reagan, his final race for Front Row Motorsports and his final race of his full-time driving career. They're in the 27th position. Drew Herring, kind of a quiet Cup Series debut, brought that 96 car home with a clean finish in the 29th position, 5 laps down. Final page, 31st through 40th. A few drivers down here that didn't even realize had problems in this race. If they ever mentioned this on the TV broadcast, I never noticed it. But apparently, William Byron retiring on lap 215 with engine issues, and then Kyle Larson just before that on lap 209 with an engine issue. If they mentioned this on the TV broadcast, I completely missed it. I had been wondering what happened to Kyle Larson because he had been very fast early on in the race and apparently had an engine issue late. So apparently I'm an idiot if I missed this on the TV broadcast, but if NBC ever mentioned it, I never heard it. So, but yeah, William Byron, Kyle Larson down here at the bottom of the list with engine issues. So that's your results from the Ford EcoBoost 400. Let's head over to the Media Center. We will see what your two-time champion Kyle Busch and his team had to say after this win and championship.
You know, it felt a lot like 2015 to me, aside from the broken legs, obviously. But, you know, in 2015, Kyle came back. We got off to a pretty hot start, won a few races. We won Indy, and then we didn't win again until we got to Homestead. But we weren't running poorly. We were competitive. We were leading laps. We were toward the front, and it takes a lot of things to go your way to win a race. And one of those things that has to go your way is you can't make any mistakes. And, you know, this year it was kind of similar. We won some races early. We had tied a record for a top 10 streak or something, I'm told, early in the year, and had a couple races get away from us. But it wasn't because we weren't fast. It wasn't because we weren't prepared. They just didn't go our way. And there were some things that we could have done better and some circumstances that happened. You know, it's just the way that racing is. So it felt a little bit like that. We had to claw our way through the rounds. And, you know, we got in by virtue of points, which we've done 3 out of the 5 times we've made it. And, you know, it's about showing up and being your best when it matters the most. And tonight it mattered the most.
This sport is extremely tough. It is human beings where no matter how much you train, we actually had races this year, and you guys probably remember, where all 4 cars had issues. And so it can happen. Tonight, you know, it's going to be interesting for us to kind of go through this and see what exactly did happen, how we can keep it from happening again. That's what you'd like to do in pro sports. You'd like to make sure you don't make the same mistake twice. And so, but I think it's a part of, this is a long, tough, hard year. And when you get here, there is a lot of pressure. And it's human beings trying to get this done. And no matter how much you work on something, you could always have something be a mistake, really, is the way I look at it.
Yeah, I don't know. Just, I'm not exactly sure. I kind of probably don't remember much of it already, but you know, I do remember taking the white flag and crossing underneath that, and just I had some tears rolling down my eyes for the last lap, and was just like, "Come on, man, we still got to finish this damn thing. Don't be such a sis." But how was my last lap time? I don't even know.
I quit looking about 10 to go.
Okay, so hopefully it was decent. I don't know. We had a good lead to the guys behind us, but overall, just emotions were starting to set in. I just probably didn't know where the hell my mind was at, but knew we had won and we had won big, and was just kind of being a bit more subdued about it.
Did you do your vow?
I did not.
Why not?
There wasn't any room. Did you see the crowd out there? There was people everywhere. So, I mean, in that moment, you kind of forget. You even forget you win the race. You know, as I was doing the victory celebration, doing the lap around with Brexton, that was really awesome, by the way. I was coming into victory lane, and they were there with the checker flag, and I was like, oh, yeah. You forget, and you win the race, so it's just that crazy. And I forgot to do a bow. It's all good. I think Rowdy Nation will forgive me.
All right, so we'll take a quick look at your final point standings for the season, the final top 10 points of the year. Of course, we'd know Kyle Busch wins the championship, his second career Cup Series championship. Obviously a great year for that team. I think a lot of us looked at him as the underdog coming into this race. I think realistically, based on performance recently, Kyle Busch really was the guy that nobody was looking at, which is weird because it's Kyle Busch. But as was talked about a lot after the race, this season bore a lot of similarities to his 2015 championship. Obviously, he didn't have the injury early in the season this time around like he did in 2015, but went on a long winless streak. In fact, in 2015, his last win before winning at Homestead to win the championship was at Indianapolis. And this time around, basically the same scenario. His last win this year before winning tonight was at Pocono. So it's been since June that Kyle Busch won a race this season. So I think a lot of us looked at him as, okay, well, he's still strong. He's still Kyle Busch. But there's just been something missing that I think a lot of us looked at that and went, okay, well, maybe next year for Kyle Busch. He made it to the championship but really don't see him outrunning Truex, Harvick, and Hamlin, and he did just that. Honestly, coming into this race, realistically, I thought it was going to be a battle between Truex and Hamlin, and Truex, true to character, was extremely strong tonight and put up a very hard fight, and so did Hamlin up until the tape incident late, but very strong runs for all of these guys. Harvick kind of fell off a little bit late, and unfortunately wasn't the championship contender that I think a lot of folks hoped he would be late in the race. Joey Logano comes home with a top 5 finish in points, just barely missing out on the championship for last week at Phoenix to have a chance to defend his 2018 championship. Kyle Larson, a strong finish in points this season. He rounds out the season in 6th, tied with Ryan Blaney there for the 6th position. So really good seasons for both of them that they can build on. And I think we're just starting to see the potential of what we could, what the talent we could see out of both Larson and Blaney going forward. I think this is just the start of it, and I think both of them are really going to start breaking out next year in 2020. I think we're going to see a lot of race wins out of both of them, and we're going to see a strong championship run out of both of them, I think. Brad Keselowski kind of faded late in the season. Really didn't see a lot out of Brad Keselowski in these final few races this season. And 8th would be where he would land at the end of the year. Clint Bowyer, a little bit of an off year for Clint Bowyer, especially compared to what we saw out of him in that 14 car last year. Still a decent season, just not quite, I don't think, what we expect out of that car. And hopefully he's able to rebound and put together a few race wins and maybe a championship run in 2020. Chase Elliott down here in the top 10 and abysmal into the season. The last 4 weeks were not good to Chase Elliott. So hopefully that ship can get righted in the 2020 season. I know there's a lot of fans out there that definitely want to see him get that ship righted. And obviously, whether you're a Chase Elliott fan or not, I think you can acknowledge that Chase Elliott running good is good for the sport, because when your most popular driver is not running well, that tends to hurt a lot of things that have to do with the sport. So hopefully he can right things in 2020 and start rattling off some more wins and good finishes. But that's your final point standings for the 2019 season, and I believe that'll do it for us on this final Cup Series rewind of 2019. We do have rewind shows for both of the other season finales from this past weekend. We have an Xfinity rewind for the Ford EcoBoost 300 from yesterday, and a Truck Series rewind for the Ford EcoBoost 200 from Friday night. Should be the last two videos here on the channel, so go check those out if you haven't already. We break those races down in depth as well, just like we did this one. But this should be the last Cup Series rewind of 2019, unless they slip another race in on me that I wasn't expecting, but I don't see that happening. So this will be it for Cup rewinds until the Daytona 500 in February. So as we head full bore into the off season, we do have some plans for you. Don't worry, we will have content going up for you all off season long, and we've got some really cool things in the works for 2020 that I'm really excited about. Can't talk about them just yet, but there's some things. R&N's getting some big upgrades in 2020, and some things in the show lineup that I think you're gonna really like, that I don't think you're expecting. Some things that haven't really been done on YouTube before, and we're gonna elevate R&N to a whole new level in 2020. I'm really excited about it. So hopefully we can talk about those pretty soon here. But so if you haven't done it already, you need to go down below, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications so you don't miss a thing going forward from R&N. While you're down there, leave me one of these if you like the video. It is much appreciated when you do. Diecast review coming up on Wednesday. Kyle Busch's Bristol win this week. It's a really cool looking diecast that I think you're going to really enjoy seeing. But at that, this has been the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series Rewind Show. I'm Garth Allen for Racing News Now.